Hello and welcome everyone to the CyVerse webinar series. I'm Tina Lee, CyVerse's User Engagement Officer. We hope you'll join us every other Friday through December 3rd for these webinars, which are on technology, platform, and science topics. Many of you already use CyVerse and know that we are a National Science Foundation funded cyber infrastructure project. These webinars help fulfill a key part of our mission, which is to train scientists on how to use CyVerse's computational resources to do their research and teaching. Let's quickly take care of some housekeeping and then we'll start the webinar. Our presentation today is roughly 30 minutes with time at the end for your questions. Please open the Zoom chat window and type your questions there and Jason will answer them at the end. As always, we do record these and we'll post these later on our website's webinar page so that you can view them at any time. CyVerse offers intensive training such as our foundational open science skills and container technology workshops. We're also working on one on machine learning and AI, so stay tuned for that. Please do visit our website at www.cyverse.org for more information on our trainings and other events. And now I would like to introduce today's presenter, Jason Williams. He's CyVerse's outreach and training lead. To introduce him, I think a series of rhetorical questions seems the most appropriate. So what to tell you about Jason, a trainer of trainers? Who better to lead a webinar on Vice than Jason? Who has been on the project since its inception in 2008? Who has taught more CyVerse workshops, trainings, and webinars than Jason? Whose Instagram feed makes you forget about bioinformatics and wish he was feeding you dinner instead? I could go on, but I think you get the idea. So I'll just welcome Jason and let him get going. Hi, Jason.
Hi, Tina, and everybody else who is tuning in or watching the recording, perhaps. I'm pleased to be with you for this 30 minutes or so. So I want to get right into it and talk a little bit about something we've worked on for a little while. It's been out for a little bit, but you may not know all the ins and outs of, and we want to make sure that you are getting most out of it. So this is something that we call VICE, or this Visual Interactive Computing Environment. I am going to go ahead and give you some slides, then I'll give you a quick demonstration in the discovery environment, and then we'll wrap up with questions. So I think my slides are coming across. Is that good, Tina? Because I'm in a different mode than I usually use. But
yes.
First question then is, why use VICE? What is it? Why would you even want to use that? Well, I think there are probably two big reasons why people come to CyVerse and come to the discovery environment in order to get some of their work done. Number one is most of the applications that people use in bioinformatics really exist at the command line, and therefore in order to use those applications, you have to be pretty comfortable at doing things at the command line. And probably the honest truth is that, let's say 80%, 90% of biologists don't get that kind of training. And so it may not necessarily be the easiest for you to use those applications in that format. The other thing is true if you are teaching, and many of our faculty use CyVerse, use it in a classroom environment, let's say at the undergraduate level, they may not have those skills. And so you may want something that's easier to use in the command line. The second big reason is that you may want to take advantage of the data and processing power that CyVerse offers you. So those are two big reasons. I kind of have these little graphics here that you might come to for. So we can give you, a whole bunch more of that than you might have access to, and that makes it, more convenient in some cases for some types of analyses to use CyVerse. And what we do is we take those resources, sort of bundle them with the particular tool or tools that you want to use. And then we slap an interface over it so that you're not using the command line. You're simply going ahead, selecting a tool, and it's in a graphical interface. And this is actually how most applications in the discovery environment work. You see the graphical interface. For those of you, I don't know if you've used the discovery environment since the refresh in the summer, but it's really attractive. And you sort of go through step by step in a really friendly way to run those tools with ease and also with a bit of computational power behind it. That's how most applications in the discovery environment work. So we call that a non-interactive way of working. You launch the application, and then a few minutes or a few hours, depending on how big the analysis is, you're going to get a folder that contains some results with it. So that's non-interactive. So What if you want to do the following though? What if you are doing analysis where actually as the analysis is ongoing, maybe it's a single tool, but it could be even multiple tools. What if you want to actually see what's happening as it's happening? And maybe there are even steps where you need to adjust or you need to see what's going on and actually make some edits or some changes to those analyses. That's not really possible in a non-interactive analysis. You have to wait to the end and you get the result, and then maybe you make changes and you relaunch it. So it's a cycle where you're a bit removed from the process. The other use case, sort of what if you would want to, what if you want to use an application that already has its own graphical user interface, right? Essentially, the majority of apps in the discovery environment are command line, so that's fine. But there are applications that one would use that actually already have their own interface. And why should you use something different? In fact, in many cases, it'd be impossible. So that's a use case that we're thinking about. And then finally, a lot of the things that we're doing, ultimately, we want to get to some type of visualization step. And we want to make it easy for you and your collaborators, your students to see the data and for you to see the data, right? And oftentimes when it comes to doing any type of data visualization, that's a very iterative process. You probably start with a graphic that you want or figure that you want. Let's say it's generated in R. That's how I do my stuff. And then the first one you generate is probably not what you actually will end up with. There's many different steps in between where you're trying to adjust that, shift things around. And so those are very iterative steps. And those things previously are difficult, well, even impossible to do in the discovery environment as it stands. So hence this thing called Vice. So with Vice, what it is the ability to, you start with what looks like an ordinary discovery environment app, but what you end up with are interactive applications that you can use. And these include some really popular things like Jupyter, R and RStudio, RShiny, and also the Linux command line. So this makes it possible for you to use the discovery environment in a very flexible way that previously was not possible. Here are some of the benefits and some of the things that you might be able to do. So it kind of answers that first question that I posed. So those use cases. One is this is going to allow you to interactively manipulate analyses and visualize data in a way you couldn't before. As I mentioned, it gives you the ability to run some popular applications. We've listed the ones that we typically support, but in principle, just about any open source software that has a graphical interface is something that could be integrated in this way. It also allows you to launch these applications on top of the processing power in the discovery environment. And I'll talk just for a slide or two at some point for more advanced users. Essentially, everything in the discovery environment runs in a Docker container. And so if you have a container, you basically have just about what you need to start using it interactively. This is some other advantages just summarized in one slide. There's no restriction on data limits. So when you're using a Vice container, well, that's what you're using, even if you don't know that you're using it. You can work with it with a really large data set, and you may not normally have access to the ability to do that. It's a secure environment. You can really customize that environment. Vice will allow you to run these applications for 48 hours. So there are the first three things on those bullet points there. There are other great services online that will, for example, allow you to instantly launch a Jupyter application. But many of those things are not persistent. So you can launch them and then they stick around for a few minutes. And if you're not using them, they'll die. That's the price of free. You have to have flexibility. Vice is free too, but basically you do have all of these advantages, including its scalability, and then the ability to sort of share the Vice application with other people so that they can see what you're doing and either help you or at least understand what you're trying to communicate. This Vice actually grew out of something that many CyVerse users are already available or already familiar with, which is Atmosphere. So Atmosphere has been around. It's actually one of the oldest open science clouds, where you would be able to launch a virtual machine sort of in the style of, let's say, something that you use today commercially like AWS. And that was also trying to satisfy the need of users who needed to work with a GUI. One of the things that we found with Atmosphere is that users often came to Atmosphere where they just had really one or maybe even a few apps, again, that usually focused on visualization. And so what we found is that we can provide all of those services through Vice with a very few exceptions, and do it much more efficiently and even quicker. As you'll see, a Vice application takes on the order of like a minute or two to get going, in some cases even quicker. With the Atmosphere, it probably takes 10, 15, 20 minutes, depending on the size of the image. So in some ways, it was overkill for what most users were actually using it for. Now, Atmosphere is still available for development purposes on a very limited basis, but then there's also Jetstream, which is another NSF-funded project, which is basically built on top of the Atmosphere interface. And so there are definitely general purpose Atmosphere or virtual machines that some of the more advanced users do like and might not be serviced by Vice. So those are still available and out there. But for most users, the solution and where we're driving them to is to go ahead and use Vice. A couple of reminders. So this is available on the US installation of CyVerse. There are other CyVerse installations out there, but the general US one, primarily at University of Arizona, that's where it's available. The next one is that authorization is required to use. So you may be an existing CyVerse user, but you need to actually go to user.cyverse.org and look in services and request a Vice, request authorization to use Vice. Like almost all forms of free computing, it can be abused by people who are not using it for a scientific purpose. So we actually want you to request access. And in that access, you should give us a fairly detailed description of what you're using it for, so we really understand it's being used for a valid reason. The other thing that you can do in your CyVerse user.cyverse.org is associate your CyVerse name with an ORC ID, universal identifier for in research. That really lets us know that you are a legitimate researcher and using this for legitimate purposes. You also have the ability, if you have students that are using this, to sort of, I don't want to use the word grandfather them in, but you can use this for workshops and for classes. You just need to let us know and give us the usernames of people who will be taking your workshops or classes, and then they would be able to get the Vice access. They will need a username, so they have to do that. As I mentioned before, when you start a Vice application, it's going to run for 48 hours by default, and then it'll terminate. It'll save your work, but that will happen. And the other thing to remember, I'll try to illustrate this as we go into the little demo portion in just a moment, is that each Vice instance is kind of like a little walled garden. So you do need to, or you're responsible for transferring data in. Sometimes it happens at launch, or you want to mount, there are ways to mount the CyVerse data store. But just remember that there are some data transfer things you're going to have to do, that you bring the data that you want to work with into the Vice container at some point. It's not like when you launch the Vice container by default, you're going to see your entire CyVerse data store. You're going to have to do a little, but not onerous work, just to make sure you have the data you're looking for. So yeah, this, I just wanted to sort of illustrate it. Vice is really integrated as part of the discovery environment and rests on top of all the other services to deliver this type of functionality. The other thing that I thought is interesting to mention, that Vice is really a great way to think about reproducibility. Everything we do is open source, so you have that going for you, to quote a meme. But the other thing is, if you think about doing Vice, this really, again, allows you to publish something like an R Markdown notebook or a Jupyter notebook or whatever it is that you're working on, and publish the code and the data and the notebook or the Vice container, whatever it is, in a way that someone can sign up and quickly, within a few minutes, be working at essentially with the same tools and the same data that you did your published research with. So it's really nice in that way. Let me transition to showing you a little bit of a live demo in a moment. And I'm just going to talk about one use case that I developed. This is an educational use case where we made use of Jupyter. I know many, but maybe not all people are familiar with Jupyter. So I'll quickly say what it is and just show you. Jupyter allows you to have these things called notebooks, in which case you're able to merge things like Markdown, where you can have text and links and various things along with code. And this is a really nice way, I think, to illustrate how code or how Linux commands in this case are being used in order to do some type of analysis or run some type of program. So in this case, we put together for another project that I worked on an RNA-seq analysis set of notebooks where we have various Jupyter notebooks that cover all of the steps of a particular RNA-seq workflow, importing data, doing quality control, some trimming, some alignments and visualizations, etc. And this one even included a backup notebook so that if your data, if you didn't want to do all of those steps, you could always skip ahead. In doing it in Jupyter, you have the markdown text, links out to things like Ensemble, so that students know where things are happening, but then the actual commands. And what we find and what a lot of people find is that this way of teaching is really effective because it's a lot less scarier than the command line, and it really helps students to get the concepts they need to work with things without throwing them on a black and white terminal. And you can also integrate questions, have students complete the code in order to demonstrate that what they're doing, they understand. So I'll show you that live case in just a few minutes in the last third of the amount of time. I just want to have one note or two for people who are a little bit more advanced on that side of things. So as I mentioned before, all of the containers are essentially, or all of the Vice tools or applications are essentially Docker containers. We have workshops, including Container Camp, that can show you how to create a Docker container. We have some documentation, and there's certainly lots of things that you can find online. If you are comfortable using Linux at least a basic level of being able to install a tool or use something like Conda or apt-get, let's say for Ubuntu, if you can do those things, it will probably take you half a day to start building your own Docker containers. It's fairly straightforward. What the Docker containers, normally when you're using a computer, you have your tools, you have any other tools that those depend upon. Maybe there's a platform that you're using, maybe there's the operating system. With Docker, you can basically combine your tools and dependency into something called a container, which is run by an intermediate service, the Docker daemon, and runs on top of your operating system. I can't go too deep into that now. We only have a few minutes, and this is not Container Camp. But essentially, it really allows you to say that if I create a Vice application using Docker, not only will it run on CyVerse, but it'll run on my local machine. It'll run on any other machine that Docker can be installed in, and it will maintain the tools and dependencies and versions in a way that I'm really reproducible. For those people who are interested in that, you could visit our GitHub, the Vice GitHub for CyVerse, and you'll see examples of containers that we use, which are essentially templates, so that you could definitely build your own. And that makes it possible for you to sort of design something that you could keep reusing in a class or in analyses where you have your own tools already set up and customized. So Vice is customizable, although I'm not going to go into how to directly customize it as part of my demo, but if you have questions, I can at least try to address those when we get to them. You write your Docker file, you will create an interface in the discovery environment to launch the application. You can even get a little button that someone could press and launch it. You'll push that to CyVerse, and then you can go ahead and use your tool. There's more documentation on learning.cyverse.org, so I encourage you to go there. And that's it for those big set of slides. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to transition to a little bit of a live demo where we are going to take a look at this. So here I am. Let me go. Well, I can just click on home. This is the CyVerse dashboard. So when you log into CyVerse, you'll see a history of things. If you weren't logged, you'll also see recent videos, applications, and things like that. If you click on actually applications, you will see a set of applications called featured apps. And it looks like right now, all of these are actually Vice applications. They don't necessarily say Vice. I don't know if it says Vice there. You can always click in the more options and click in details, and it will tell you what this thing is and active analysis. But before I even click on any of those, a new button, really new, if you look on the side, is Cloud Shell. So one feature request by a lot of people is, hey, I just want to use a Linux terminal and do something really, really quick, right? Customization, because it does take effort in order to integrate an application on the discovery environment. And that's great because that application will stay around, but it's not interactive. Well, if you want to do something quick, you can click on this Cloud Shell, and it's going to tell you, okay, just give us a second. And all the Vice applications have this lovely little logo and GIF while things are loading. And we are now in a Cloud Shell. So we are now at a Linux shell. I've zoomed in just a bit too much, but this is basically a Linux shell that I could go ahead and do Linux commands on. Because if you also notice, if people recognize this, we happen to be in a Conda environment. So I could certainly install tools, because this is going to be a fairly sparse, fairly blank thing right now. But I could say, hey, you know what, Conda search. If I type, hold on, waiting for it to catch up with me. Conda search. Let's say I wanted a tool like BWA. I probably should tell it to search on the BioConda channels. But for those people who are familiar with Conda, then that's really a key tool to just going ahead and installing a whole bunch of sets. If I go and actually, while that's going, you could go to the BioConda homepage if you're not familiar with it and learn a little bit about it. But basically, quite a number, I'm sure if this is the top 20 packages, SAM tools and PySAM, BCF tools, these are things I'm sure you love and know and use that are used pretty frequently. And the command I did was not just to install those, but I just wanted to quickly check what versions are available if I wanted to install them. So literally, you know, without any kind of effort, if you just wanted to do something quick and dirty, so to speak, you could go ahead and get something running. It wouldn't be permanent, it wouldn't stick around, but for small things where you're just trying to, I just need to do this. And I did these 3 applications on the discovery environment. Oh, they don't have this one little tool I need. Well, you could do that. The thing that you would need to do in here is you would have to go ahead and transfer your data. So for those of you who are familiar with iCommands, you could bring in your data set here in order to get that data set manipulated and then save it back to your discovery environment. The other thing that you could do is if we launched it not from that instant launch, but if we just clicked on this bash, and now I have 2 of these running. So let me terminate this so I can give you a little bit. You do have a limit of 2 Vice applications that you can run at any given time. So I'm clicking on my analyses menu, and I'm just going to cancel this one because it's running and I can only run 2. And I want to show you a little bit about how you can bring data in. So, let's go to terminate. When you terminate, you'll always get a folder. So you'll always come back to your history and you'll be able to see things that you launched with previously, including any outputs. So it's hard to lose any data that you've worked with. Okay, close that. I was going to go back to applications. If I launch a Vice app this way, like a bash shell, at this point, I could actually choose input files or folders so that those data are already there. I wouldn't have to use iCommand. So I did it the really instant shell way, but you have that ability too. The other thing that I've done is I've gone ahead and launched, whoops, I didn't mean to do that again. It's a little bit too easy to launch. I'm going to go back into my analyses, and I've launched a few minutes ago an example with a Jupyter notebook that I created for a set of lessons. Oops, not these. Let's find. This was for a set of undergraduate lessons on RNA-seq. The cool thing here with these, I'm going to skip ahead to, whoops, I should skip ahead to this one, where, you know, in this case, I would tell the students to go ahead and click on this button to launch the lesson, because you can generate a quick link to any application within the Discovery environment. It would take them there and they would just follow the steps. I'm being blocked now because I have two things running, but I've already launched this for you is kind of my point. So I'm going to go ahead, I'll cancel the other one. So we'll get a good practice in. When you have an application, Vice app that's running, you can come back to it, and under more actions, you can terminate. You can also extend the time limit. You'll get a warning before your time is about to go out after 40 hours, but I'm just going to terminate that one since I don't need it. And for the applications that are running, you'll see that either here or in your notifications. Your notifications will say things like, hey, this is running, you can go ahead and visit it. But I am going to go ahead, since this says this one is running, and click on this little go to analysis link. And it will launch. Now, even when it says it's running, this is a little tip. It may take a few minutes, depending on the size of the data set, for it actually to be available. So even though a Vice application might say it's running, always give it a few minutes, just in case it takes time. But here we are, we're in a Jupyter environment. For those of you familiar with Jupyter Lab, on the left-hand side here, I can access the data store. I can link with GitHub. But in my case, I can go to my notebooks folder on this thing created, and I could go into any one of the Jupyter Notebooks that I created, and I could go through and execute any given command. The idea here, of course, is to get students familiarized with what they're actually doing, but the basic part of it is that you're able to go through and make sure that people are able to use those commands. So that's how it works. You have this ability from the Discovery environment to launch a whole set, like I go back here to these featured applications of things like Jupyter, RStudio. This is an Ubuntu instance, ZCH cell, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And on a basic sort of, principle, just about anything that you can think of that fits that category of an open source tool, maybe it has its own GUI interface and you want to see that running, you can integrate those things via this Vice mechanism. And it gives you really the whole range now from one portal, from the Discovery environment, of being able to work with these interactive applications, launch them, package or customize them, increase the reproducibility of your work, or make it a whole bunch easier to teach a class or a workshop where you want to have a whole bunch of people with a very limited sort of fuss to be able to use these commands, use these applications, and have them do the work that you want. So with that said, it's been about 30 minutes, and I will be happy to take any questions, and I'll answer as many as I can, and we'll get answers to you if there are questions that I can't answer, because there's plenty of those out there. But we'll go ahead in the chat, and I'll answer any questions, or if you you can feel free to unmute, use your video, whatever you want. Of course, it's recording, but I'll take those questions now.
Jason, thank you. Yes, I don't see any questions in the chat yet, so feel free to either type them in or unmute yourself. You have that ability, and ask Jason. He's a great resource, so I hope you'll take advantage of his time.
I see Steve.
Yeah, Jason, so one use case I have in mind, suppose I'm working on a project that uses a big data set, and I want to share it with other collaborators. How can I use Vice to do that?
Sure.
And maybe work together on code, for example, and work on the same notebook together.
Sure. So the way that Vice is set up, it is kind of like this little walled garden where people are able to do that type of work. The first primary thing that you'll do, let me go back to, I don't know how familiar you are with CyVerse in general, but in your collection of data, if you go into where your home data collection is and you have your gigantic data set, the first thing you'll do is you'll select that data set and go to share, and then you'll enter the name of the person or persons that you would like to share that data set with and make sure that they have access. When you share that data, like if I put the name of a user that I know, you can decide what level of permissions that they have. They would at least at a minimum be able to read the data. But later on, when you, let's say, launch that Vice application and you want them to be able to have access, I believe that you can come to your analyses folder here. And once you have that Vice application running, so I'm just waiting for it to load. As long as that application is running, you'll see it there. It'll be an application that's running. If I click on that and click on share, I'll also be able to select other users who should be able to view that application. I have not done this myself, so I believe it works as intended, but if it doesn't, we can always check with you. But what that should enable you to do, if I understand correct, is it should enable you to be able to use essentially that same Jupyter notebook, like, hey, look at this command or look at this visualization or something like that. So you can decide whether you also might have like a Zoom going, or maybe it's a Slack or whatever method that you want, if you want to have, unless your application somehow includes an audio visual or whatever. But basically you'd be able to share those things so that you could both be working on the same data set at the same time using the same tool. That's possible. And if we try it, Steve, you're still muted. So if you try it and it's not working the way that you'd like, let us know so we can improve it.
So does that collaborator use the same instance, or do they spawn a different?
So in the
instance?
case, if you're sharing it like that, it should be the same instance. That would be my understanding. Other CyVerse folks on here, if I'm saying the wrong thing, you can correct me. I haven't done it, but it should be the same instance.
Great. Okay. Nathan had a question about how does one bring their own container image to CyVerse, and I think you've covered that in your response to Steve. But Nathan, if you had a follow up on that.
So there's probably more I could say, and also I see Amanda on here, and Amanda actually might be even better than me at this, Amanda or Ritu. But essentially, when we have, so let's say you have your own. I don't think we want your image. I think we actually want your Docker file, because what we would prefer to do is to have the Docker file and push it to a CyVerse repository. So we serve our own, we have our Docker files and serve those things. The reason why we don't want to accept containers from people is because, although if we trust you, Nathan, there might be other people who we don't know what's in the container. So the Docker file is preferable. It is possible to, if you have, for example, that like, let's say on Docker Hub, to actually give us the Docker Hub address of something that's already built and we pull it down. Amanda or Ritu, do you have any insight or preferences that you'd want to communicate on that? I don't think it's never straightforward to me. So, but that's what I've done in the past.
That's okay. We've been changing things on the back end, which won't affect Nathan any, but the rules are changing on me too. Yeah, so Jason's right. Having a Docker file is always great, but I have often pulled things in that were already built from Docker Hub, and that's generally how I do my own things. So I'm going to push it to Docker Hub or some sort of repository somewhere before it actually becomes a tool. But basically, once you have a container, in the apps tab in the DE, there's actually a button called Manage Tools, and in there you can add a tool, and it's basically as simple as giving it a name, saying whether it's going to be an interactive app or an executable app that you build on this, and then providing the, say, hub address for that. And then you have to build the app on top of that. So just integrating the container is step one, and we call that the tool. And then on top of that, you build an app, which will vary a good bit depending on what you're doing. It's reasonably straightforward. And then if you want to publish it, it actually gets sent to us so that we can add that to our private registry before it becomes public. So if you want to change it, you should change it before you make it public.
Yeah, so you almost certainly, at least at this point, will interact with a staff person who can help you do that. And then, the first time is rough, but it gets better. I just posted a link to the Vice GitHub. As you'll notice that in our Docker files that you'll find there are a few little things that we add into the Docker file that make it compatible with what we're trying to do, and then also add things like commands, which you usually would want to have in your container to manage. There are things I haven't used told that the web dev and other ways to mount the data store, those are some accessories. So talk to us, but we can help you through, and also as we learn from your use case, improve our documentation. And then Tina, do you want to speak to Brian's question? He had questions about Docker learning materials.
Right. Thank you. And thanks, Amanda, for that. Yeah, we do workshops called container workshops. Container camp is what we call it. And there are two. There's a beginner, so you learn basics and how to use containers in CyVerse that are already built. And then we have an advanced follow-up where you actually come bring your own data and do the more high-level customization of your containers. Just in terms of apps, I wanted to say, and some of those are available on our YouTube channel. So if you go there and search for containers, it should pull up either playlists or various videos. We've got close to 50 videos over the years on all topics. And so you'll hopefully find something useful there. I did want to say that in 2 weeks, our next webinar will be both Ritu and Amanda, who will show us all about apps in CyVerse. So some of the questions today about how to bring things in and where to find things, how to use them, how to integrate apps. Our two wonderful science informaticians will give us that webinar. There is a follow-up question from about, let's see, live collaboration mentioned in the first question. New Jupyter Lab in version 3 has a live real-time collaborative editing, so you could be in the same notebook co-editing. I imagine this could be eventually added to CyVerse. Does anybody on our staff want to be able to respond to that?
That should be addable to CyVerse, and you can complain to us that the loudest wheel gets the oil. So keep reminding us that we respond to user input. And I put there also links to the learning materials from Container Camp. The camp itself is not fully recorded because it's kind of like a one-time deal. We want it to be interactive and live for the students taking it, but the learning materials are publicly available. So that can be a big help to learning and getting started as well.
And we have completed Container Camp for this year, but there will be another series of camps in the spring and fall of next year. So Jason, any last words of wisdom?
The most important thing is to try these things out and then let us know what you'd like to see, because we are all about trying to make sure that this fits the use cases that many of you have come to us in the past with. And we can always improve if we have the feedback. So we'd love to hear more about how you're using it. If you run into any problems or things or ideas or suggestions that can make it more useful for you, and spread the word and let your colleagues know, because this solves a lot of things that I know I would be hard pressed to solve in a large way in other places out there that provide services like CyVerse.
Great. Well, thank you, Jason, and thanks to everybody for attending today. Again, please join us in 2 weeks for all about apps in CyVerse. And to register for that, go to our website events page, and see you back here in a couple weeks. Bye, everybody.
Thanks. Bye-bye, everyone.